A good Erev Shabbos to everybody. We'll begin with Birchas Kohanim. Vayadaber Yinoy Moshe Lemar, Daber Alam V'Albanav Lemar, Kesevaruchu as B'nei Yisrael Amar Lahem. Yibarechecha Adinoy V'Yishmerecha, Yoyer Adinoy Panav Eilecha V'Chuneka, Yisa Adinoy Panav Eilecha V'Yosem Lecha Shalom. V'Samu Hashemi Al B'nei Yisrael V'Ani Avorachem. I want to thank the sponsors for Kiddush this coming Shabbos. It's sponsored by Menachem and Michal Bryski, my brother and sister-in-law. This is in honor of Michal's mother's yahrzeit on the Neshama Shelahavan Aliyah, Batya Bas Moshe. And it's also sponsored by the Socher family. Thank you very much. Slight schedule change in services tomorrow. We're going to begin at 9:30 tomorrow instead of at 9 o'clock. Junior congregation will begin at 10:30. There'll be a class in Chassidus at 9 o'clock, so services will begin 9:30. Junior congregation at 10:30, followed by the Kiddush. We've also resumed now. Mini sermons are given outdoors during services, so I speak here today on Zoom, and then a miniature sermon tomorrow during services. Let's get right into it. It's a packed portion. There's some excitement that goes on, some drama that goes on in this week's portion, and a very, very confusing story. One of the more difficult stories of the Bible takes place in this week's portion. I'll get right into it. I will try my very, very best to summarize for you the question and a little bit of the answer. In this week's portion, Isaac marries Rebekah. Isaac is the second of the patriarchs. Rebekah is the second of the matriarchs. They remain childless for 20 years. Isaac prays on her behalf and she conceives. And she feels two children struggling within her. She goes to inquire of God. And she is told that there are two nations in her womb. She's not pregnant with one child, she's pregnant with twins. And they represent two different nations. Rebekah gives birth to the twins. They're called Esav and Jacob. Esav came out first. When the boys grow up, Esav, who is Isaac's favorite, becomes a hunter, while Jacob, Rebekah's favorite, is described as a homeboy, a dweller in tents. That's the way the Torah calls them. Yoshev Ohalim, he liked to stay in the tent. He studied. One day, Esav comes home from the field exhausted, and he's hungry. He asks Jacob to share with him the stew that Jacob was preparing. Jacob agrees on condition that Esav sells him his birthright. Esav agrees and sells his birthright to Jacob for a pot of stew. Biblical story, says it openly in the verses. The story continues. We jump fast forward. Isaac grows old. His eyes become dim. It's very difficult for him to see. He expresses his desire to bless his beloved son Esav before he dies. While Esav goes off to hunt for his father's favorite food, Rebekah, the mother, dresses Jacob up in Esav's clothing, covers his arm and neck with goat skins to give him the feel of his hairier brother, prepares a similar dish, and sends Jacob to his father with the food. Isaac, assuming that Jacob was indeed Esav, blesses his son Jacob, who he thinks is Esav. I quote from this week's portion, "And may the Lord give you of the dew of the heavens and the fatness of the earth and of abundance of grain and wine. Nations shall serve you and kingdom shall bow down to you. You shall be a master over your brothers, and your mother's son shall bow down to you. Those who curse you shall be cursed, and those who bless you shall be blessed." Very powerful blessings. Jacob, dressed in Esav's clothing, took Esav's blessings. Jacob goes out of the room. Suddenly Esav returns with food, and he learns what his brother had done. He breaks out in tears, and I want you to listen to the words described in today's portion, because the Torah is divided, each portion is divided into 7. Today is the 6th portion. Today's portion reads as follows. When Esav heard his father's words, he cried out a great and bitter cry, and he said to his father, "Bless me too, O my father." And he said, "Your brother came with cunning and took your blessings." And he said, "It is for this reason that he was named Jacob, which means to outwit, for he has deceived me twice. He took my birthright And behold, now he's taken my blessings. Esav hated Jacob because of the blessings that his father had blessed him. And Esav said to himself, let the days of mourning for my father draw near, and I will then kill my brother Jacob. All parts of the drama of this week's portion. Question. What I find difficult to understand is, why did Esav hate Jacob only now after he took his blessings? Why didn't he hate him decades earlier when he took his birthright for a pot of stew? Why is it only now that Esav recalls the events of Jacob manipulating and outsmarting him to obtain his birthright for a pot of stew? Why did he never mention the episode before? Why don't we find him up in arms over that event? And then, of course, we have the obvious question. Is this the proper way for a woman to behave, to come up with a scheme to outsmart her husband's wishes? If Rebekah had a good reason as to why Esav was undeserving of his father's blessings, why couldn't she just simply communicate it directly to Isaac? Why couldn't Rebekah follow the old tradition of Jewish wives who always explain to their husbands how wrong they are? Rebekah had a good argument. Her argument against granting the blessings to Esav, one that Isaac would certainly understand. The Torah says clearly that Jacob was a wholesome man, a dweller of the tents of study, in contrast to his twin brother Esav, who is described as a skilled hunter, a man of the field. Which one deserves the blessings? It's clear. So Rebekah should go and explain it to Isaac. Rebekah favors Jacob for good and just reasons. Esav the hunter, the man who despised his birthright, as the Torah has already told us, and sold it for a dish of lentils, was clearly a materialistic human being, not destined to be a faithful follower of God and of spirituality. It is so clear that the mission of Abraham must pass through Jacob. And history proves Rebekah right. Jacob's descendants became the nation of Israel, who granted the world the belief of God, of morals, of ethics. Who did Esav become? He fathered the Edomite nations and the Romans. There's been much evil that came to the world from him. So why would Rebekah not share this insight with her husband instead of manipulating the situation? So in order to answer this question, we have to do the Jewish thing. What's the Jewish thing? We ask another question. Why did Isaac cherish Esav so deeply and want to give him the blessings? Makes no sense. Isaac certainly appreciated the spiritual greatness and holiness of Jacob. In fact, when he sends Jacob off to find a wife, next week's portion, he blesses him. Or this day, end of this week's portion, may God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, and you shall become a populous nation, and may he grant you the blessings of Abraham to you and to your descendants, that you may inherit the land of your dwelling, which God has given to Abraham. It's very clear from these statements that he's saying to Jacob, when he knows that it's Jacob, that he never intended to make Esav the patriarch of the people of Israel. He never thought to give Esav the land of Israel. He never considered him the successor of the blessings of Abraham. So why did he want to give him blessings? And the answer, again, I'm trying to summarize for you, is to give you the understanding of this portion in a short amount of time as possible. There were two different blessings. There's the material blessings and there's the spiritual blessings. Isaac all along intended for Jacob to be given the spiritual legacy of Abraham. He always intended on Jacob would be his successor spiritually. But Isaac observed that Esav had a quality that was lacking in Jacob: physical strength, power, aggressiveness. Isaac felt that despite Jacob's obvious spiritual and moral superiority, in a world that's filled with violence, you need to be able to defend yourself. And Isaac felt that Jacob, this gentle scholar in the tents of Torah, did not possess the ability or the desire to wage wars, to fight against cruel and vicious opponents. The voice is the voice of Jacob, as the Torah says, while the hands are the hands of Esav. That's what Isaac says to us in this week's portion. Esav's power lay in his hands, Jacob in his voice, in his study, in his prayers. One was spiritual, one was rather material. So Isaac has a vision as a father of these twins. Jacob would represent the spiritual core of the Jewish people, while Esav would become its material defender. Jacob would be given the blessings of Abraham's spiritual role, while Esav was to be given the blessings of the material world. And together, they would make this ideal team, this great team of brothers. Isaac hoped that his twin sons, the more aggressive hunter Esav and the more spiritual tent dweller Jacob, would pool their talents together and work together. And so he planned to give the material blessings to Esav and the spiritual birthright of Abraham to Jacob. Enters Rebekah. Rebekah, however, understood that Esav was not interested in any joint partnership, that Esav would attempt to undermine and completely destroy the more spiritual Jacob. And she comes to a conclusion that Jacob needs to take on some of the qualities of Esav if he wished to survive in this world and to transform the world into a place for goodness and godliness. He's going to need to develop some Esav-like qualities too. And this was the plot behind Rebekah's actions. She dresses Jacob in Esav's clothes, teaching him that at times he's going to need to dress in the clothes of Esav. Sometimes he will need to lift up the sword of Esav and become a skilled hunter, a man of the field, in order to defend himself, in order to defend his family. If Israel was just a nation of peace and not a nation with an army or an air force, what would it be today? There's a time that Jacob needs the clothing of Esav in order to survive. Not because we want to go to war, not because we're a people of battle. We want to live. But we need to defend ourselves. We need to defend our land. We need to defend our families. So true, this would only be external clothing, the garments, not the real essence of who Jacob is, who the Jewish people are. His essence will always have to remain Jacob, the spiritual one. The voice is the voice of Jacob. But externally, in order to survive and thereby change the world, he will have to at times put on the garments of Esav. The very act of dressing like his brother and taking his brother's blessings allowed him to develop within himself the Esav quality of chutzpah. We're going to need chutzpah to survive. And this is the deeper meaning in Rebekah's words. Now, my son, listen carefully as I instruct you. Go to the flock and fetch me 2 choice kids, and I will make them a dish for your father, such as he likes. Jacob, she was saying, go to the flocks, go out to the field, go out to the street. Take your Torah out of your tents and go out to the world. You're not always going to be able to sit inside the yeshiva and study. You're going to have to learn to live in the tough, dark world of Esav, while still being Jacob inside. This is why Esav began hating Jacob only after the episode with the blessings, not the episode of the birthright. You see, in those days, the firstborn son was the one dedicated to spiritual service and religious ritual. The firstborn was the spiritual ambassador for the family. This Esav could tolerate in Jacob. So when Jacob said, give me the rights to the firstborn, Esav says, sure, you can have it. I don't need to be the ambassador of spirituality for this family. I'm not interested in that. That's your cup of tea. No problem giving it to him. Knowing that Jacob is indeed the spiritual saint of the family, that doesn't bother Esav that much. Esav doesn't mind the fact that Jacob sits in yeshiva all day, wrapped in a talis and tefillin, studying Torah, meditating in prayer, and dancing with God. Gesundheit, he says. Esav can make peace with religion and with holiness that is reserved for inside the synagogue. Stay in your Beit Medrash, stay in your cheder, stay in your shtetl. Esav can even tolerate long bearded Jews with long payas studying in Williamsburg and Bnei Brak and in Borough Park. Stay there. But once you invade my turf, once you try taking this Torah out into the world, that's my territory. Briefly think about the story of Purim. It says in the Megillah, Ish Yehudi Haya B'Shushan Habira, referring to Mordechai. There was this Hebrew who was in the capital city of Shushan. You see, Haman, the villain of the story of Purim, was not angry so much at the Jew hiding out in some shtibel somewhere. What bothered him was that Mordechai was B'Shushan Habira. Mordechai walked around in the capital of the Persian Empire, walking in public as a proud Jew. That's something that Haman could not tolerate. So when Esau finds out that Jacob has this ability to dress in his clothes, to demonstrate some chutzpah and some courage, that triggers his anger. Now Jacob has crossed the line. And as long as Jacob is in the little shtetl, totally isolated in his religious world, no. But when Jacob suddenly goes out and he conquers the fat of the earth, when Jacob brings Yiddishkeit, Judaism, to the public, to the mainstream, this becomes a crisis for Esav. When Jacob builds beautiful modern schools, when Jacob starts building synagogues in suburbia, when there's mikvahs built all over the world, when there's educational centers, when there's campuses, when Jacob puts up menorahs in shopping malls and shopping centers, and puts up menorahs in City Hall and in government centers all over the world, when Jacob inspires students in the halls of Princeton and Harvard and Yale, when Jacob wears a yarmulke and tzitzis and walks proudly in every community in this country, that's when Esav is disturbed. This was the Lubavitcher Rebbe's message to all of his Hasidim and to all of his followers. Leave the shtibel and the sheltered communities. Take the message of Jacob out into the world of Esav without any fear, without being intimidated, with courage and with faith and total commitment to the mission of bringing light and blessings to all corners of the world. It is written that before Mashiach comes, that Esav will come and acknowledge the rights of Jacob. That this friction that began in this week's Torah portion will come to an end. And Esav will say, indeed, the blessings are yours. They're rightfully yours. And that conflict will come to an end. And we have seen this as the opposition to Yiddishkeit, the opposition of building Jewish communities all over the world has come to an end. You know, it used to be, you may not be aware of this, but in the 70s and 80s, anytime Chabad tried to put up a menorah in a public square, we were fought by our own people, by the ACLU and by other movements within Judaism. How can you put up a menorah in public? Keep your menorahs in your communities. Don't put it out in public. And we won this great victory in the United States Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court said that you can put up a menorah at every city hall and every Capitol building, and even the White House put up a menorah. And it's been that way now for years without opposition. It used to be when Chabad would want to come to a community, there was opposition all over the place. Who are you guys? What are you doing here? Stay in Brooklyn. There's no more such opposition, not from any movement within Judaism, not from any neighborhood. Chabad is now welcomed everywhere. That the Jewish pride has come out to the streets. Esav no longer does battle with Jacob. And so perhaps what we're witnessing is the prophecies concerning the coming of Mashiach, as the Rebbe always instructed and made clear to us. The ultimate mission of the Jewish people is the bringing of Mashiach. Nothing less will suffice. May it happen speedily in our days. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful Shabbos. For those that join me Monday evening, we have a class on the stories of the book of Genesis, Monday evening at 7:30. You're welcome to join. And this coming Thursday, we're going to have a very special Thanksgiving lecture at 12:30, the same time when we normally had our Wednesday afternoon study group. We're going to have a Thanksgiving lecture. You can go to jewishacademy.com and find out all the information Wednesday at 12:30. Shabbat Shalom to all.